Welcome viewers, this is Tex of the Black Pants Legion. Now this is an interview. I've spoken with admins, hosts, developers, and other creative talent behind Space Station 13 before, and they are notoriously antisocial types who generally don't like to talk with or at people for prolonged periods of time, as they are often judge, jury, and executioner on a server, and can't be seen demonstrating favoritism, at least in theory. Anyways, here's how this works. I'm putting out an open call to any and all Space Station 13's admins, devs, and so on public listed servers. The call is here, so answer it. If you're interested in answering or participating in an interview about Space Station 13, its history, and your server, please respond. See the description below for an email contact. I'll try to get to you and we can set something up, time permitting. That being said, this is an interview with a Space Station 13 staff member. The questions are largely freeform, and the discussion does not reflect exactly the policy of the server unless explicitly stated otherwise by the person I'm interviewing. The reason I say this is I want to encourage a staff member of Space Station 13 to be frank, honest, and open about their experiences without worrying that they're shitting on their server, or to prevent them from being yelled at for representing the server community in a bad way. This is a point of view and not, I repeat, not an absolute definition of doctrine on said server. That being said, I welcome our interviewee, Apophis. Please, internet person, tell me your name you wish to go by, your server, and your admin rank, and other privileges you hold.
So I'm Apophis775. I am the host and developer and also an admin for Space Station 13 Colonial Marines.
Tell us about your server, its history, and what makes it unique in this crazy world of Space Station 13.
So Colonial Marines came out of a server that someone named Sergeant Marine, as far as I know, that's as far back as I recall, someone named Sergeant Marine came up with sort of an initial idea for it, and I believe it was called Infestation Station. And then it was brought onto New Eden. I had applied to be a developer because there were a lot of bugs and got turned down, but I did get accepted as a moderator. There was a bit of drama between him and some of the New Eden people, and at the end of that, he was gone, and the runner of New Eden at the time, Jaeger Estep, made me the person who did pretty much all the development because he was developing New Eden and doing a whole bunch of the text-to-speech stuff. So from that, we sort of blew up a little bit beyond that, brought some more people in, and the short story is we eventually broke away from New Eden, moved on to our own server, and started developing like crazy to the point that we're at right now. We've had a ton of developers across time and a ton of different iterations to get to where we are now. But our primary theme is that we exist in the Aliens universe done by Ridley Scott and James Cameron, focusing more on the Aliens movie than a lot of the other stuff, but we do include things from some of the novels and some of the comic books and some of the games. Maybe not all the movies. I think we skipped Resurrection, which we refer to as Should Not Be Named.
Yeah, good call.
And yeah. So we do a lot of the stuff with that, and we try to create an experience kind of reflecting that. But we also take some motivations from Vietnam and similar games like that, where we were trying to put people into a specific mindset of when they're going down. We want to make sure the Marines feel that they're as expendable as possible. Well, the crew up on top are trying to get them to do the mission while basically just throwing tons of them at it. And we also try to go for a lot of other feelings, such as the Predators being powerful murder houses, not exactly just murder boners, but being able to stand up and be strong, but we're working on that a bit more, and we're slowly adding in more stuff from the Aliens universe, because the goal we're trying to create is sort of a player versus player server within the Aliens universe with themes, but we want to try and add more stuff in.
So what would you say makes this server truly unique? Because this server is probably the most consistently heavily populated server on Space Station 13.
So one of the things that makes us a bit more unique and helps with our population a lot is that we are sort of the only server where somebody can join the server and within about 20 seconds consistently have a fully automatic weapon, well, mostly automatic using burst fire, where you could basically, if you wanted to, gun down your own people. Now, the admins would stop that, which is, I think, one of the other real big pillars of our community and our server is that we've got a very good staff team supporting the player base so that when people break rules, if you help, you almost immediately usually get somebody responding back to you. Now, sometimes when we get up into the higher population numbers, if we've only got a few staff members on, it can take a bit of time, but we usually try to make sure that whenever there's problems like that, that justice gets done. And I think that's one of the things that's separated us from the other servers that try to spin off of our code base and do similar things, is that we have a good staff team that is dedicated to maintaining the peace and maintaining the integrity of the round. One of our staff procedures is actually that you're supposed to do everything you can to maintain the integrity of the round and to keep things flowing.
Good call. Now, my question next is, why should a Space Station 13 player, let's say that they've watched my stupid videos or somebody else's good videos or any of the content, Lord Mandalore's review, what have you, and they decide they're going to play Space Station 13. They look at the server list and they see your server banging full of people. Why should they play on your server? What makes it most enticing? Other than, as you said, full access to insane amounts of weapons right off the bat.
I think part of what draws people in is that it's a very different experience from pretty much any other server out there. A lot of servers, they're more based on the round and the secret antagonist and who might be doing what, who's going on. And a lot of people like that gameplay. I still go on to a lot of the servers because that's a really fun way to play the game of who done it, who's doing this, what's going on, how can I protect myself, things like that, especially on the roleplay sides. But our big difference is that you know who the antagonists are at the start. You know who the teams are. You know all the aliens are bad. You know all the Marines are good with quotation marks around them.
Yeah.
And you know that the focus is going to be the aliens fighting the Marines. You know for the most part you can trust the person around you to not intentionally betray you. Usually a lot of people will take a lot of shrapnel to the back of the head.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Yes, you will.
But for the most part, if you recognize some of the same names, you know that those are people that you can trust to go down to the planet and fight with. And I think a lot of people just sort of enjoy more of the military theme that we've got, where it's more structured. Anyone who's played knows that when you start in as a Marine, or anyone on the Marine side, you've got that rank in front of your name. And some people who like to roleplay will play to that. They'll be like, Sergeant, do this. Private, do this. Oh, I outrank you. You have to go do this. Things like that. And I think that's one of the things that draws people on and keeps people there as well.
So what would you say is the most common thing new players ask about your station? What are the things they're asking for help for? What do you think are the barriers that help them challenge them, shall we say, when they get in?
Well, one of the things that new players ask the most is, and I think we have a startup guide somewhere that we usually link to people, but the common thing people ask the most of is, where do I go? Because if you start in as a regular-based Marine, you spawn in cryo. And other than the 4 arrows on the ground pointing to north, to south, there's not really much definition of where to go. So new players will sometimes join and they'll ask for help and what to do. And we actually have an entire section of our staff called the mentors, who their primary job is to help guide these new players so that they can explain where to go, how to get to briefing, how to get down to the planet, so they know what to do.
Now, you told me about the history of the server and how you became involved in it, but what made you continue to volunteer your time? Many of the Space Station 13 admins I know of describe it as a transitory experience.
I think part of it is that... I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I think part of it is that I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and Aliens has always been one of my favorites. Has always been one of my favorite movies. Even when I was younger, when I'd seen it when it first came out, it was always one of my favorites. And to be able to sort of take that experience from a movie and bring it then into a game is just like a real blast for me. And the other thing is I went to school for game design and I teach game design. So this is, along with sort of running the server and turning it into something that we like, this is also sort of an experience for me to, on the level of sort of running my own sort of game, things like that. Now, CM isn't as much mine anymore as it used to be because we've got tons of developers who've contributed time, and it's grown so much from back when I was the only person and back when me and Raul were like building the evolution systems and when there was all that stuff to how it is now, where I would say probably 85% of the code has been done by other people on the dev team now. And most of the stuff that I've done is just more legacy stuff. Though I still do try to do more stuff. Like we've got the zombie mode coming up and such. Sorry, did I go a bit off on too much of a tangent?
No. That's interesting because you're saying that, where once you planted that seed has grown and now you have other people helping tend your orchard of trees.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the hardest part? Because I find that with adminning and administrating these sorts of things, they each have their own challenges. But what is the hardest part about being an admin on a server where virtually everyone is armed to the teeth?
Well, for the longest time, the hardest part was making sure people couldn't kill each other. But luckily, the word had eventually gotten out as we started growing bigger and bigger that really people can't just log in and start gunning people down because we'll be on that immediately. The person will be removed from the round and we'll have everybody healed up and pretty much there will be no lasting effect from that. And I think when people realized that we have the server sort of at the point where you can't really grief and have any major impact on the round anymore, that it wasn't really worth it because what were they going to do? Jump in, kill 2 people, get banned, and then everything's back to how it was before that? A lot of the griefers, they prefer to have more of a long-standing effect. And when they can't do that, it sort of pushes them away. So that was one of the hardest things to overcome. But after about over a year and a half, I think, of being really hard on griefers, immediately getting on people who would gun people down, stuff like that, we've stabilized a lot of it. And now pretty much the hardest thing is when people are on the server, when there's conflict between players and the players start getting OOC upset and we have to step in for that, tracking meta grudges, things like that. Because we don't really have as big of a problem as we used to with people just gunning each other down. Well, other than friendly fire, but...
That's every day.
Yeah.
And I will say this from my own experience, I've only seen one time, really, where someone, lit a grenade off on the ship. And even then, it was oh my god, I'm so sorry. And then everyone role-played it out. Some boot marine dropped his grenade and blah, 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 and all laughing about it, smoking cigarettes. And then, it shows a different sort of mindset about it. So here's a good question. What do you think is the greatest challenge for driving Colonial Marines forward? It's come a long way. It's very popular. But how are you going to maintain that for the future?
I'd say one of the biggest challenges we run into a lot is we have a lot of ideas and a lot of concepts and a lot of stuff we want to implement, but a lot of times we'll come up with all these grand ideas and such, and then it'll take a while to implement. Even working at maximum efficiency, some of our coders, we joke, exist on a diet of Adderall and cocaine because they code so quickly, but we always have more ideas coming in, and we're coming up with more ideas than we could ever possibly code. So one of our big challenges is to pick out what we think are going to be good ideas, what's going to work, and try and bring those into the game to make it better.
So another slight different question, and I've spoken with the admins and staff of Paradise. They don't mind me using this as an example. How do you combat the special snowflakes, which I'm sure do exist on a station like Paradise, where many people are allowed to create these vast social constructs and histories of their character, which of course must be the center of attention at all times?
So one of the ways we sort of combat that is Marines tend to very quickly realize that if they're a base Marine, they can be the specialist snowflake in the world and not a single person is going to give a tiny little fuck about them. And a lot of times, I think because of that, they sort of realize they can't be as center of the attention as much. So instead of being the center of attention as a person, they try to force their squad to be the center of attention, which is how we come up with terms like people always talk about the Deltards and
Yes.
Alpha Squad, Best Squad, things like that, because they take the special snowflakeness that would apply to just them and they shift it onto their squad. And if they have a squad leader with that same mentality, it can result in a lot of really good things. It can result in sometimes a squad that is exceedingly exceptional, drawing all the praise and stuff from high command and doing all the stuff from high command that they're all their orders and stuff, doing it quickly and doing it well because they're trying to maintain that sort of standard of we're the best squad. Other times you do end up with some special snowflakes, but because of that, we have some sort of special Snowflake roles. Like we have, for example, the corporate liaison and the chief medical researcher, who are roles where they can sort of play into their, I'm supposed to be like this more special person, and they can try and interact with the regular players, and it sort of
Yeah,
leans
yeah.
toward that. Because
I
they're
know
not
what you're
just the
getting at.
expendable Marine, they're just like the dude.
Yeah, and I got into that the other day. I had some of my fans say, "Hey, play as the corporate liaison, play as the corporate liaison." So I did, and I said, "What do I do other than walk around and be this weird guy?" And within 5 minutes, I started selling insurance to Marines. I had a briefcase at $3,600 before briefing started.
Exactly. Or one of my favorite rounds with the corporate liaison, I was playing a regular Marine,
Yeah,
and the corporate liaison had paid me to kill the captain because he had gotten the XO to sign a loyalty agreement. So I was like, okay, I can do this. So he handed me a revolver. The captain lets me onto the bridge to talk because I tell him I have information, and I'm like, the corporate liaison says hello, and I go to shoot him, and all I hear is a click. The corporate liaison had set me up by giving me an empty revolver. So corporate liaisons, they can go in and do all these sorts of plots, sometimes even without breaking the rules. Or we also have this thing where if corporate liaisons are doing a good job and they're messaging the staff, if they can get somebody to respond to them, which depending on how busy the server is, can and can't happen, you can get permission to bypass some rules and sometimes even objectives to do things against the Marines.
yeah. I saw crazily enough the other day, Apollo the synth and the corporate liaison had hatched this crazy plan, and it got completely out of control. And it just kind of drove the narrative. So that's really exciting to see crazy things can still happen even within that regimented approach to storytelling.
Right.
So, what is your opinion, since we have brought up recording? What is your opinion on people who play on your server and record? And what about those who stream?
So currently our official stance is that if people want to record, all they have to do is help to let us know so that we put a note in their account so that we know that that person's recording. Part of the reason that we do that is so that if something happens involving them, we can contact them and we can be a little bit more subtle if that's not something that they want to get up onto their stream or things like that. But also it lets us know who's recording and then who sort of that we should watch and that we should look out for. Because sometimes people will say, oh, I'm recording. And then we find out that they're recording so that they can subtly grief and talk about how to bypass things on the server or things like that. As far as streaming, pretty much it's the same thing. You let us know that you're streaming. We ask that you have a 5-minute delay if you can. If not, because people like to interact with their audiences, the other thing we ask is that if they die, they follow along either with the Marines or the aliens, whichever side they were on, so that they're not unintentionally revealing to people who might be watching the strategies of the other side. And for the most part, we've had no problems with any streamers, any recorders. We've got, well, I know you've done some recording. We have 2 or 3 other people that do recording. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, that's
But
cool, though.
We don't really have any issues with that.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So, do you have any issues on your server with Metacoms and Metafriends? I know we were talking about how people like to tag together. They like that familiar name, and they go, oh, that's another guy I know because he's got a personality, like your guy's infamous Bill Carson or what have you.
Yeah.
And you guys have no problem with someone up saying, sir, pleasure to serve unto you again. Remember that time we did blah, blah, blah. But what do you think about people who do metacomming? Because all Space Station 13 servers have that. Do you have ways by which to intercept, find out who they are, and punish them?
Well, we don't support metacomming at all. So, in the past, some of our staff members have been banned for metacomming on other servers, but it's a very difficult thing to catch. Typically, the way that we catch it is basically we're able to witness it sort of in-game, the same way other servers do. 2 people walking around wordlessly doing the same things together, seeming almost perfectly in sync, and then usually if someone notices that, they'll start watching, and they can tell pretty quickly. And the thing is, with a lot of metacommers, when you ask them if they're metacomming, if you tell them you're pretty sure they're metacomming and who it is, at least one of them will almost always come clean quickly, because they don't want to get the ban, because they're worried that their one instance of metacomming will get them a ban. Depending on the situation, sometimes we're lenient. We're like, don't do that again. Or sometimes we give them a 1 or a 2 month ban or things like that. but it's a very hard thing to stop, to catch. But we've had a past experience where there was an entire Metacom squad, and when we found out that they were Metacomming, we laid the hammer down on them pretty hard, and as a result, that pretty much ended a lot of future Metacomming. Or at least people who Metacom are really much more careful about it. But part of the thing that makes it much more difficult for people to Metacom, on CM at least, is that it's a very squad-based game. So if you're only Metacomming with one person, you're very limited with what you can do. You need to be able to communicate with your entire squad, and for a lot of people, Metacomming isn't viable because unless they got a whole squad in there to do it, they can't really work effectively. What they can do is they can talk with their one or two other people, but they can't talk with the rest of the squad. So it's usually easier for people to just type.
So now that we've talked about staff a little bit, what do you think makes a good admin good?
A good admin good? Well, as most people notice, we usually have very few admins, and that's because we try to hold admins to an incredibly high standard because they get access to a lot of abilities and a lot of powers that can drastically ruin the round if used incorrectly. I don't know how many people remember way back when somebody turned, I think it was called Japanese Schoolgirl mode on, which was a holdover from Old Bay, and everyone's gear and equipment got replaced with like little staffs and these tiny little gimpy suits. And people were like, well, there goes the round because these have 0 resistance. So we try to look for admins that have been a mod for a very long time, have done a good job enforcing the rules, who step up and do work outside of the regular mod work. Like, we have a lot of mods who work in what we call the investigation channel, which is where when somebody applies for a ban appeal or submits a player report, instead of just the head staff dealing it, we post it in the investigation channel. And then a staff member will go through, pull the appropriate logs, find everything that seems to fit in with it, get player IPs, CIDs, additional accounts, all that stuff that's related, and then post the results. And that helps us determine the way to go. So we look a lot of times for people who like to go out of their way and work on that when they're moderators or even mentors, and then we know that there's someone to watch. Also, we never want admins to be super hardcore ban happy because that's what the mods are for. The mods are sort of the people who apply most of the bans. The admins usually try to just step in if something's going extreme or step in to be more of, oh, this is actually not too bad of an issue. Things like that. So we try to look for people who are pretty balanced as far as banning and leniency wise and a few other things.
So what, on the other flip side of the coin, makes a bad admin bad?
We've actually had very few bad admins throughout time.
I mean, aside from Japanese Schoolgirl, you know.
Yeah.
I mean...
He actually wasn't fired because he was immediately let us know, and he was like, oh, dear God, I didn't know it would do this. So we usually try to not fire people as much as we can. So even if we have a bad admin, somebody who's either abusing or not following the rules properly, we'll do everything we can to try to retrain them. Sometimes we'll bring them back down to moderator so that they can go back through a lot of that introductory training stuff and such. We have our senior moderator, SLC. He does an amazing job of training the mod team. We'll sometimes send them back to him to retrain because I take sort of the same feeling that the Army has, because from when I was in the Army, which is it's better to have somebody that you can retrain who will then become reliable than to just bring a new person in and start from scratch. If you can have somebody who is reliable but there's a few problems, retrain them, get them working to what you want to be, working the way you want them to be, and then continue to use them.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to waste an asset.
Exactly.
Okay, now the next one is probably going to involve some storytelling if you want to go into it, or I can use examples if stories fail you. There is always the nature of balance between shitcurity and the gray tide, and your station, well, your server really doesn't have a gray tide, just fuck-ups. But there is a big animosity, I've noticed, between people who hate the MPs, because often enough you have people who overstep authority because they can, And then you have people who just want to get down to the planet as soon as possible, get their weapons, whatever they are, break into stuff to get in the RO line faster, and so on and so forth. How do you maintain that balance without everyone lynching all of the MPs and without Marines running around beating up the RO and taking all the attachments they want?
So one of the most important things we did, which gave MPs a lot more power, is that their tasers and their stun batons only worked for them. So in the past, we had an issue where if people were like, that MP's arresting my squad leader, fuck him, they would go tackle him, take his baton, and just keep batoning him. Well, now if they grab his baton and try to baton him, I don't remember if it's still in because I haven't tried it in a long time, but we at one point had it where if you tried to baton someone and you weren't an MP, the baton stunned you instead. Or the taser gun just wouldn't fire, it would give you an unauthorized user alert. And one of the things that did is that removed the ability to stun an MP down and keep them down. So all you can do is tackle them, but a tackle won't keep them down forever. And if they get up and they get their taser out, they're going to tase you down. So that's part of a deterrent. Another deterrent is that we added a fair amount of MPs. So the MPs are able to more effectively control the Marines that they need to. And most Marines would much rather go along with the briefing, even if it's a little longer briefing, and follow the proper procedures than risk being thrown into a brig. Because once they're in the brig, in my experience, if somebody gets thrown into the brig because they were committing a crime going directly against the MPs, they're probably going to be there forever because every single thing they do wrong in the brig is going to get time added on. If they run out before their time is out and attempt to escape, they're going to get captured, thrown back in, their time doubled. If they start swearing and yelling at the MPs are going to be like, that's disrespect to a senior, add time on. So a lot of people have realized that it's much better to just go along with Marine law or to be very sneaky about it, which brings a bit more of a roleplay aspect. And one of the things we've actually seen over the last few weeks is that people are committing more subtle crimes, and the MPs are actually having to go gather up fingerprints and start collecting blood samples and try and get that stuff. So we're wondering what we're going to do with that other than possibly adding some forensics because it's becoming more of a part of the MP gameplay. But at the same time, around 85% of the time when they figure out who did it, that person died horribly to an alien. So
yeah, it's like so-and-so did this. Well, they're being digested right now, yeah. So
they go down, arrest the person, and then he bursts.
Dock his pay.
Yep. At least we knew it was him.
So here's a strange thing, because I've noticed you guys really don't have an AI other than the occasional ping of there's this many life forms. Have you ever considered having a more active AI or a role that could be played by players?
We have considered that. I can't go into too many details about that, though, because it's something that every so often we're like, you know what, maybe we should start thinking about this, and then sometimes we'll be like, no, it's good how it is for now. So I can't go into too much depth about that. What I can say, though, is that the admins can function sort of as the AI. They same with moderators. They can make AI announcements using a verb. So they can literally go and say something. For example, this person is attempting to breach this area, as like an AI would, in order to sort of help with that. And some players will also, or some staff members will also respond to people if they ask the AI questions using the AI announcement thing. So we have a little bit of that, but we don't have the full AI that you would expect on other servers.
All right. Now, what is the craziest moment you've seen a player do? And I'm talking, this is where you can share your best Bill Carson story. And for the viewers who don't know, Bill Carson is one of the craziest characters on this server. He is definitely up there in the realm of Cuban Pete. He is definitely up there in the realm of Dr. Floor Pills. It's something that people automatically know who he is on this server. So what is the craziest, zaniest player moment you've seen in this game?
So it was actually not too long ago. It was, as you were saying, it was a Bill Carson moment. The ship was being boarded, and he was ordering all the Marines to go down to the area where the dropship had crashed to stop the aliens. And at the same time, he triggered the escape pod. And he runs to the escape pods. And something I didn't know at the time that someone else had let me know, because I saw that he had been yelling for people to go to the north escape pods, and he had run to the south, was that aliens were at the north escape pod. So he was basically yelling for the other survivors, instead of running to the south escape pods where he was safe, to go to the north one to delay the aliens even longer so he could escape. And I want to say I remember him being the only person to get off of that ship alive that time.
Glorious. So what is the worst dumb player moment you've ever seen?
The absolute worst dumb player moment was back before we had a safety on the Sadar, so that you couldn't fire it on the Sulaco, because this was before we were on the Almayer, which is the map we're on now.
Yeah.
And a player thought that, because he had seen somebody else put a Sadar in their mouth and they click and not fire, he thought that the Sadar just didn't fire if you put it in your mouth. So he put
wait,
in his mouth.
It's like an 84 millimeter rocket launcher.
Yeah,
and
he was doing it as like a joke
in his mouth.
But it fired because there wasn't the safety. The person that did it when he saw just didn't have a rocket in it, so it fired, but doesn't blow up, because we had seen people do that sometimes to try to suicide a whole area up, and we had adjusted it. Instead, it just rockets his head off and dumps a ton of smoke all over.
Good God.
And everyone was like, oh God, what happened?
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah, just kind of getting in the mindset of a Marine sitting there and briefing and watching this guy's head fly off.
And they were like, oh man, he's going to do it. And then everyone like flips out. His head's halfway across the deck.
Oh, God. All right. So what is your best favorite round of Space Station 13 you've seen on this server, and why?
There's a lot of really good rounds, so it's hard to probably pick my best, but
your favorite.
A lot of the ones that are my favorites are the ones where it progresses exactly how we have the game want to progress. The Marines fight planet side, and it's a slow losing battle, which pushes them to eventually have to abandon the planet. And then they go back up to the ship, and they're licking their wounds, trying to get healed, and then all of a sudden they get the message that one of the pods was hijacked, and it's on its way up. So then they go and they decide to go defend somewhere. Usually the self-destruct area now. It used to be the bridge. And then what follows is a slow capture of the Xenos overrunning their defenses on the ship as they're trying to hold them off for the 20 minutes required to arm the self-destruct. And then probably one of my favorite ones is the Xenos overran self-destruct. There were 2 pylons left that needed to be turned before the button could be pressed. And the Xenos are just scouring the ship looking for the one remaining dude who had been laying down under a body, pretending to be dead. The Xenos go past him. He stands up, runs to the self-destruct room. The Xenos see him and start chasing him. He hits the 2 pylons and then gets tackled down right on top of the button. But then he manages to stand back up and hit the button before he's killed. And the ship explodes, and the Marines were victorious, and everyone was flipping out. They were amazed at it.
So, what would you say is the best sort of player for your community? Who do you want to come play in your community?
Well, everyone is welcome, and basically just people who are willing to read and then follow the rules, because the rules we have, our rules are a bit different than other servers. And part of that is because the rules try to help craft the experience that all the players have, and because of how freeform a lot of our stuff is, we have to be more specific with the rules. So people who are willing to follow the rules are people who we're always willing to welcome onto the server, because they'll contribute to the greater community, to the greater lore, to everything as a whole. And the other thing is, the more you follow the rules and the longer you're there doing that, then sometimes you'll start to get leeway if you're doing something a little crazier. Like, for example, Bill Carson has been there for so long, he's got a bit of leeway when he's doing things like, for example, when he's ordering Marines to go run to their death to save him, or when there's a mutiny afoot and he's the target, and his decision is, instead of to surrender or anything, to just start counter-mutinying. A lot of that is sort of stuff that we understand someone's not doing it to grief, so we sort of give a little bit more room with that, and that's why we're willing to bring in pretty much anyone, even people who have been on other servers that have griefed, or people who've griefed on our server in the past. We can be sometimes very forgiving with our appeals if it seems like someone is genuinely interested in playing the game, in following the rules, in interacting with everyone, because that's what we want, a community of people who they know the rules, they follow them, they play along with them to create an experience that everyone likes.
All right. What is your favorite special event on your server, and why?
Now I'm probably going to be biased because it's part of the round I wrote, but my favorite one right now is zombies, and that's an upcoming mode which should be added in more permanently soon. But basically, instead of being against the aliens, you're going against the black goo virus. And PlanetSide is basically, it starts with an empty colony, a few survivors, and either a Special Forces whaling team that's guarding the viruses, or a few zombies somewhere that are set to release after an amount of time. And basically, the story is that they were experimenting with the virus, it got out, it started to turn people. And it's one of my favorite modes. I remember the early times we would play it, people would find like the bottles of the virus and they'd be like, "This looks delicious," and just guzzle it down.
Yeah, that interesting.
Yeah. I remember one time I was watching a scientist tell a Marine not to guzzle it down, and he just started guzzling it down, and then was just like, "What?" And they're like, "And you're a dead man walking."
Fun times. So what is your least favorite event that you've tried?
Let's see. Well, unlike a lot of other servers, we don't run too many events. Usually when we run an event, it's a slight modification. I would say one of my least favorite type of events to happen, though, is when we end up with, like, unnecessary mutinies. Because there's a difference between a mutiny that we allow and a mutiny that's, like, people are like, "The commander said the word ass, we're going to mutiny."
Yeah.
And that sort of that can be a round killer, because if the commander has legitimately done nothing wrong and people are mutinying just to mutiny, they're basically ensuring the crushing defeat of the Marines and the overwhelming victory of the aliens. We had one mutiny turn so bad where on PlanetSide they almost killed the aliens. We told the Marines that they managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory because of how horrible the mutiny had ended up going. Because they had basically eliminated their entire defenses on the ship. All that was left was the survivors from the planet, a few wounded people, and the doctors. And when the Xenos came up, they just steamrolled.
I can imagine. So what is your favorite role to play on your server?
I'm partial to medic and doctor. Whenever I play alien, I used to play carrier, and for a while I was known as like one of the best carriers, but then we changed the gameplay up, and a lot of the shenanigans I used to pull don't work. So now I play a lot of boiler or Praetorian, because I stick more ranged. Or, like I said, on the Marine side, I play medic or doctor. I'm a huge fan of medical in Space Station 13, and I always have been.
So what is your least favorite role? Like, what just doesn't interest you?
Probably the role that doesn't interest me at all on the alien side is drone or hive lord, because I'm not a big fan of building. And typically, if I end up playing a drone or a hive lord, I usually just follow them with the boilers, and I'm just like, have some plasma. And on the marine side, probably standard marine, or I guess specialist, because anytime I'm a specialist, I'm just bombarded now with jokes of the one time I accidentally friendly fired several Marines with sniper rifles.
I could see where that went bad.
Yeah, a lot of people remember me shooting someone in the back of the head, that person refusing treatment on principle, getting gangrene, and then dying. So
fun times.
Yeah.
So why are our prayers never answered? Are we undeserving?
There are a fair amount of prayers that are answered, but our preferred method of answering them is the SC button, which spawns you a cookie.
All right.
So it's more of that. We do answer them, but we're not like sort of a god in the sense of other Space Station 13 servers, where if you have a really nicely done prayer to a specific god, you might get something useful. Typically, we're more apathetic. Sometimes if someone has impressed us a lot with their stuffing around, for example, we one time did a gladiator round where instead of going down with guns, they went down with swords and old armor. And the guy who led them took down like 2 Xenos and died, and then prayed for a second chance. And we were like, you know what, he deserves it. But usually prayers go unanswered. We'll jump to see what the situation is. But part of that is also that, when people pray, it's usually something along the lines of, I pray for the strength to escape from all this Xeno captivity. And then we jump to them, and they're in the exact center of the hive, surrounded by 15 sentinels in webbed to the ground. And then we're like, well, have a cookie.
Yeah, I mean, you can't take away the fun of those other players just because someone doesn't want to be stuck. Now, you did mention you play occasionally on other Space Station 13 servers. What servers, what jobs, and why?
I played on Base Station for a while when they were doing their ship, which I don't remember the name of off the top of my head. And I played a lot as the I think it's the rank is Command Sergeant Major. I think it's the senior enlisted officers. They call it CSE, CSO, something like that.
Yeah.
And I played as that a lot, partly because of, like I had said earlier, I was in the military, and I really liked that role because it was sort of a role that was bringing something to the enlisted side on their server that you don't have on other servers, which is two separate chains of command. One chain of command for the officers, one for the enlisted. So I like sort of that liaison role between the enlisted and the officers and doing stuff with them, like finding off-duty, I think they're called Marines on their server as well, and interacting with them and things like that. And the other server I play on is Aurora, and I play a lot as a detective because I just love the forensic system they have.
I've heard good things.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. There's so much stuff to do with it. I was known for a little bit when I played like a whole bunch, because sometimes I'll play a bunch and then be off for a few months, where I would write like 30-page reports for crimes and give it to the head of security, and he'd be like, well, thank you. And then I'd be like, by the way, we need to order more toner cartridges. Yeah,
I'd imagine. So, as an admin, how often do you press buttons?
A fair amount. Sometimes we have people riding and briefing, so a common thing, it used to be a button, but we got rid of it because people were abusing it, but a common thing we have to do is try to calm everyone down there all at once, and I think I'm the only one who still does it, but I'll spawn a bunch of cluster bangs in order to give everyone a, hey, calm down.
Yeah, I was there for that. You spawned 55 flashbangs.
So I meant to spawn 5, but I hit 5 twice.
That was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Hey, it got everyone's attention, and then all the people who were like messing around trying to break the glass while the commander was talking, they stopped. And that's sort of the point of that, is to let them know, hey, the admins are watching, calm down, let's progress, let's move along. Because sometimes you usually have 1 or 2 rabble rousers in a round, but if you ever get a group of people who are rabble rousing, that's when it can delay everything. It can sometimes, I've seen it sometimes delay the Marine launch planet side by 20 minutes, so that instead of 20 minutes, it's 40. And Marines, instead of going down to a mostly empty colony, are walking into a completely fortified Xeno hellhole, where around every corner you've got hugger traps and boilers waiting to blast you.
Yeah. Now, here's a good question. Is I have noticed there is this role on your server, but I never really see many of them. It's rare to see them. Survivors. Why are survivors so rare? Is it that aliens fuck them up, or is it just not many people are cleared for the job?
So survivors are rare for a few reasons. First, every round, if people have survivor on, there's only between 1 and 5 of them. And on rounds of like 40 people, there's 1. On rounds of like 250 people, there's 5. So there's only 5 of them on a round like that. The problem is they frequently get overrun by Xenos almost immediately. And it's something that we've been working on and trying to fix. I gave them some weapons. There's actually, you have a chance of spawning in as a survivor who's a priest, and he has a sawn-off double-barrel shotgun in reference to Grigori from Half-Life.
Good choice.
But one of the problems we have is that if one Xeno finds a survivor, he'll call all the Xenos to him, and those survivors won't survive very long. So we're working on trying to figure out some ways to give them more longevity, but it can be difficult because the more equipment we give them to survive, the more easily it is for them to just kill off all the aliens. So it's kind of a balance fight.
What's to prevent them from walling up in an area?
Materials, usually. And the fact that when Xenos find them, Xenos are just like, oh, you've walled up? Let me call a Sentinel. And then they just melt the wall down.
Fair
and then
point.
managed to get him as well.
So why did you switch from the Sulaco to the Almaer?
So the Sulaco, as it is, was a ship that was thrown together by an older member of staff who did some mapping stuff for us named Alan. I don't remember his last name because we always called him Alan. His not his character last name, his like sea key was Alan something. But he did that, and it worked for when we needed it. But over time, it went from being like a streamlined, cool-looking ship to when we need to extend medbay. I just extended it out into space. When we needed to add more room into security, I just extended it out into space. And it went from looking like an interesting ship if you were walking around, or if not if you were walking around, but if you were ghosting around, to looking like a whole bunch of modules just coupled together. And we wanted to go for something more streamlined. You'll notice that on the new one, we have both the bottom level has an outline, and so does the top level. And the reason for that is so that we don't go outside of those outlines the same way we did before, so we can keep the ship streamlined and looking more like a ship that's multiple levels.
What are you going to do with those rooms that many ghosts have found that are completely filled with metal foam?
So those rooms are the former CIC, which was the Command and Control Center, before we moved it over. We're still trying to figure out what we're going to do with those rooms. There's been a lot of proposals. We were originally going to put a firing range there, but we realized we don't want Marines going to the upper deck to fire their weapons off. So we moved. So instead, they put the firing range on the south end of the dropship bay. I don't know what our current plans are for those rooms off the top of my head, but I know we've been talking about a whole bunch of different things to be putting in there.
All right. So if you could say one thing to new players on your station, what would it be?
Well, one, that they're welcome to play there, to read the rules, and one of our famous mottos is ignorance is not an excuse. If you break the rules, which you didn't know because you didn't read them, we lean that onto you. But that usually doesn't happen. So and we're still fairly lenient with that. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got to give people room to grow.
Yeah.
So here's one of the most divisive questions in Space Station 13, something I've asked every admin, head of staff, developer. Clown or mime?
It's a conflicted question because I traditionally hate clowns, but I also know that they can be useful. One of the best decisions I ever made during a nuke ops round was to give the clown my stun baton, access to chemistry, and the nuke disc. And no one was able to get anywhere near him, ever. But at the same time, I'm not a fan of clowns because they do a lot of I'm going to grab this stuff to prevent you from doing your job because it's a prank. And sometimes, a lot of the time, I see their call sign is almost, it's a prank, bro. And that can be annoying if you're trying to play on a server and just do a thing. So I lean sometimes towards mine because of that, but like I said, if you ever need a clown to do something important, they will usually use their robustness and their shenanigans to do whatever that is.
Fair point.
You give a clown a nuke disc, 10 gallons of slipping spray, or space lube, and they'll prevent anyone from ever getting that nuke disc.
A keen observation. As we've reached the end of the interview, do you have anything you want to communicate to the Space Station 13 community? Shoutouts, apocalyptic warnings, requests, or so on. The time is yours.
Not really. Just come, play the game, have fun. That's sort of why we do it, and that's sort of why we keep everything there. Oh, and stop asking when donations are going to open back up. They're going to open back up when we want to open them back up. We don't want to constantly be seeming like we're pulling money in. So.
All right. Which is admirable. Yeah. Anyways, folks, this is Tex of the Black Pants Legion, and this has been an interview with Apophis775. Thank you for your time, sir.
No problem.